ask first the Q&A, which is about the story that you saw in the background of Spider. And we will commence. Hi, everybody. So we will commence very soon. So you might be talking right now, but maybe you can stop talking, or talk quiet, or talk in the other room, or talk outside. It's a thing you can do if you want it. It'll be okay. It takes a while to slow the momentum of the room. It's totally fine. Awesome. I'm going to call that good enough. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. As I said, if you want to, you can come right up and play Spider. You won't be interrupting me. If you want to have a conversation, feel free to take it outside or in the other room. Have a drink, whatever you want. And I'm just going to go through, hopefully, a briefer presentation about the mysteries and magic and the stories of Spider. So here we go. Before there was the story of Spider, there was the reality of this gravestone. The way it goes is that my friend Melissa was doing yard work, and she flipped over what she thought was just a normal rock, and it turned out to be a grave that was in her backyard. And so we spent an entire day doing research about who was C.K. Jackson and was his body around in her back lawn, and we found all this really cool stuff. We found a cemetery that had been exhumed to make way for a Catholic elementary school to go on the same site, and a Mrs. C.K. Jackson who had been buried there but mysteriously never was registered as winding up in the receiving cemetery, and a Chaz K. Jackson who was probably the same guy who there was prison records about him. But none of it really added up to a clear, coherent story. It wasn't like sharp and definitive. And instead it had this kind of magical, like Heisenberg uncertainty principle quality that, like, since we couldn't really pin it down, like anything was possible, like several different stories were possible at the same time. There's kind of this, I was really absorbed by this magic process of research into this. And Spider didn't even exist as an idea yet, but it was actually one of the more formative inspirations, as I realized in retrospect. The very first design document for Spider talks about like a story where you got turned into a spider by a witch and you're trying to turn back into a human. And it was deliberately super crappy placeholder. It's really just like, even though this is a very mechanical game about slinging webs and stuff, we definitely knew there should be a story in this game. And I think one of our early breakthroughs came when I built a whole bunch of test levels, because I was just trying to explore the mechanics and figure out what the levels would look like. And also kind of explore the spider fantasy. Like I wanted you to put webs in places where spiders in real life put webs. And so there's a bunch of different levels. There was like some abstract shelves. There was a boot that you could go inside. And this is a level that people responded to really well because they wanted to know, it seemed to tell a story of some guy who comes home from work and he's depressed and he's drinking by himself, and they want to know, like, who is this guy and what is he so upset about? And so this is kind of where we started to understand that the story didn't just have to be the spider story. It could also be a human story and the people that the spider encounters in their dramas. We really quickly realized it was cool to do things like go between the floorboards, in between the walls, into places that humans don't go anymore, and find the props and stuff that those humans have forgotten or discarded or hidden there. For a couple different reasons. One is, again, that's sort of part of the spider fantasy, but the other one was it answered this question about the lens of the story. Like when you're telling a story, it's often important to know, why is this character the character of the story? Like, why are you playing a spider instead of a frog or a fireman or something like that? And this answered the question. Like, it's crucial that you as a spider get this perspective on the story that no one else has. And in fact, the spider is the only character in Spider who gets the whole picture. All the humans are missing some part of it. And so it's a story that's told with props that I sometimes refer to as archaeological storytelling. Or it's kind of like forensics, like you kind of examine the scene and try to figure out what happened here. And the Spider 1 story took place on the very first day that there was no living humans left in Bryce Manor. Like, it was the first day that the place was abandoned. And so you go through, and in the course of doing normal spider stuff, you leave the place covered in cobwebs. And so that's kind of like the other reason that it's important that you're a spider. You're kind of like the agent of abandonment. Like before you're there, it's this recently abandoned place, and when you leave, it's like covered in cobwebs. It's obviously abandoned. And in retrospect, I think we started to understand that one of the meanings to the story was kind of about death. It's like this idea that when we're dead and gone, the only thing that people will know us by is these small tokens that we leave behind. And then also it's this rare opportunity for us to tell stories in video games that involve these very fine details, like there's a wedding ring that's lost in the drain here, which in many video games, like it would be hard to notice a small detail like that, because you're like running 40 miles an hour and potentially shooting everything you see. So the Spider 1 story is about a pair of brothers who are involved in the love triangle with the neighbor girl and the playful patriarch of the family who C.K. Bryce, named after C.K. Jackson on the grave, who's an inventor and an adventurer, and he, after his death, from beyond the grave, he's left the secrets hidden in the house for his descendants to figure out and unravel. And so we kind of imagine the story as like a picture book where like each page was a different level, and you kind of flip around and start to make these connections, like where you'd see like, oh, well, this lady in this photograph is the same one as over here, and then there's this photograph of this guy, and you can see the medal on his chest is the same one as this one in the secret drawer we found previously, and then there's a map with an X on it that we've seen on the wall, and you sort of start to put this together and try, as you're flipping around the book, try to figure out like what is the story of this place. But none of it comes together really quickly, and one source called it tattered storytelling, which I really dig. We contrived to make this interpretable and easy to read, but the truth is we really wanted people to all have their own different interpretations of it, like to put together this incomplete history, that there is no for sure definitive interpretation of. Like, I have mine, but other people have ones that are also equally valid. And Spider also plays with this separation between player and avatar. I mean, like the human being playing the game and the spider they're controlling. And it's exhibited most in cases where the spider is on top of props that a human would have an emotional response to, but the spider doesn't. Like, as the spider, you only have the tools to build webs and eat bugs. That's like all the spider cares about and all the spider does. You can't read books, you can't talk to people, none of that. You can't investigate the human story explicitly. And so it winds up with this thing. This is the worst slide here, I almost apologize, it's so terrible. But this is my attempt, my most recent attempt to do this thing that I've attempted to do a bunch of times, to just kind of diagram or explain how this works. So basically the fundament is that, like, on one hand, you're playing this mechanical game about eating bugs and building webs, and you're just a spider who can just do spider things and just be interested in spider things. But then you kind of like look over your own shoulder, and then you're like watching a movie of the spider who's going about his spider life, and you're noticing that he's in this environment that you, as a human, maybe are drawn into and interested in. And you kind of want to examine that story or interact with it in some way, but you can't. You can only be a spider. So it's this massive multi-layered thing. Starting at 2, you're the spider who only eats bugs. 3, you're in this house whose story is told through its props. 4, that story is about this family who's having these relatable domestic dramas about love triangles and stuff like that. But they're living in this house. 5, that has this secret that they kind of are trying to uncover, but they can't, only the spider can. So 5 connects back up to 2, and then on the top at 1, you're this human who's playing the spider. You can only do spider things, but you're kind of interested in everything that's 3 and below. It's not a great analysis, but it's the best I've got right now. Right, and so this is the thing that, one of the things we think is cool and worked really well, and this is like one of the areas I really want to innovate more and explore more for Spider 2. So there's this idea that you've already heard about where, like, when you look outside your window in real life, that matches what you see in the game, right? And so there's already this connection between, we're trying to blur the lines between reality and game a little bit, more even than I just discussed. Right now I'm launching, so part 1 is like, I kind of understand Spider 1 stories in retrospect. Now I'm going into Spider 2, which I hopefully will understand in 3 or 4 years, but I probably don't right now. I'll do my best. Here we go. So one of the things that didn't work so hot about Spider 1's story is that mystery layer with the patriarch. Like, people didn't get it. They didn't pick up on it. Very, very few people actually solved it and found the secret of Bryce Manor. And so one of the goals for Spider 2 is to make that layer, that mystery layer, juicier, more obvious, more interactive. So you saw in that cinematic with the gargoyle's arm, like, that's much juicier and it's much more upfront. And we'd like more people to figure out that the puzzle exists and solves it. So one of the things that, very early on I started thinking about secret societies. And so the idea for Spider 2 is that it's not just one manor, it's an entire estate, and the estate is built by a secret society, and they build it for a specific purpose. So if you find secret passages or weird engravings above the hearth in the rock, or some kind of weird puzzle thing, it's because the secret society put it there for a reason that you can kind of figure out and decode. And secret societies are like totally perfect for this theme because they already blur the lines between fantasy and reality. They have their own mythologies that they have invented that probably aren't true, but may have some basis in fact. Or maybe they're just a front that you're supposed to believe because that'll distract you and the real secrets are deeper, and maybe not even everybody in the secret society knows it. Maybe entire secret societies are faked, but then people later on didn't know they were fake, so they picked up the mantle and started to be that secret society. Maybe there's a bunch of them that's actually true. Everything I just said has been true in secret societies. I've done a bunch of research. They have encrypted messages that they send to each other, and they like to engrave things in stone. That earlier slide was a photograph from New York City. And I love the way all this like adds confusion. So the characters, you know, in that layers thing that I've been attempting to diagram starts to explode into 4 dimensions, where it's like the characters who are in this fiction don't, you know, even know what to believe. They can look at their environment and see that it has some sort of meaning that is signaling to them, but they themselves don't know what to believe. And that's the story that pops up the stacks that the spider's interpreting, but not really interpreting what the human who's watching it kind of is, etc. I'm going to change topic for a second. So this past fall, me and my friend Tim started digging in the ground in the tiny little rural town of Shrouded, Vermont, where I grew up. And what I was expecting to happen is that we'd dig for like 5 minutes and find one little tiny shard of glass, and then we'd be like, nope, this one's too small, it's from the wrong historical period, and we keep digging. But that wasn't true. Glass was everywhere. It was all over the surface of the ground. Every 2 handfuls of dirt you pick up was like full of glass shards. And this is antique glass. And as little kids, like Tim grew up not even a quarter mile down the street from this place. Like it was a 3-minute walk from his house to there. And as little kids, we would have loved to go digging for quote unquote treasure, right? This would have been the most amazing thing. I was pretty stoked as an adult, to tell you the truth. But we had no idea that this treasure could be found. We didn't know this till recently. It turned out that this tiny little rural town we grew up in, called Sheldon, was at one time an important place that people from all over New England and beyond would visit by train so that they could go to these mineral springs. And the mineral springs were thought to have curative and restorative properties. People thought they cured cancer. And so people would take the train up from New York City, and this water was bottled and it was shipped all over the United States. And you know, if you can find the bottles today, they're like rare antiques and collectibles. And yeah, and so that's what we were digging up. It turned out that the place we were digging was actually the site of the former hotel, where they would like basically discard all the crap they didn't want. It was like their junk pile. They're just like throwing these bottles down there. And so all these shards they were finding were thrown out there like 150 years prior. And actually that spot was the mineral springs. Like the ground there was kind of like gravelly and clean and wet in this weird way, and it was because the mineral springs were buried there. They like completely forgotten. Like the end of the story is that, you know, mineral springs kind of fell out of public attention and favor because probably the reality was they didn't cure cancer, unlike the fiction about them, and probably for other reasons. And somebody burned down the hotel, a disgruntled employee, and then not even 3 generations later, like nobody knew this or talked about it. Like I grew up, I went to this elementary school, and nobody talked about this. Now part of it might be the fact that the actual fiction of this hotel that we're looking at on the label of these bottles doesn't match the reality of this photograph of the actual hotel. But once you show up from New York City, I guess it's too late to complain, right? So, now a nearby town that I went to high school in, a slightly bigger town, was called St. Albans. And it was this really beautiful former railroad town, and you know, years prior it had been like really wealthy. But growing up, I just remember seeing these like beautiful facades and like these like this ornate stonework that had been like repurposed by a photography sort of photographer, and like, you know, these to me at the time mysterious and strange inscriptions, you know, in the stone, and just thinking. I remember just even back then just having this acute sense of this layers of history. Like there's these beautiful stonework facades that clearly had been something in years prior, but now the people living in them sort of just didn't even know what they were. But there's obviously some history if you could dig it up. And I used to say that the stories of Spider 1 was inspired by John Bellairs in his books, but I think I'm starting to understand that the other way around, that I was drawn to the John Bellairs books. I kind of grew up in the real life version of his stories. Like, his books are all about strange inscriptions in the stone and secrets that are hidden in houses and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so because we want secret societies in Spider 2, I've been doing research into this like really fun, very deliberately obfuscated topic of like what are secret societies really? What's the deal? And like everybody else, I knew the kind of stuff you see up here. I knew the Templars, I knew Nicolas Cage and National Treasure, you know, I knew the word the Illuminati, that there's these weird occult symbols. I've seen Eyes Wide Shut, you know, and that was a great starting point. It's a dirty movie. But I wanted some more authenticity. I wanted to get to like what is the real deal of secret societies, and so I spent actually months researching this topic, and I think I'm starting to get a grasp of it. I don't think anyone can ever truly understand it, because if you could, they wouldn't be very secret, right? But at some point I'm going to post that on Tiger Style's website and blog. I'll get to that slide in a second. I'm not going to go into that much detail here because I don't want to take up that much time. But you know what I wanted to do for Spider 2 is have a real life secret society be the basis for the one that you see who built Blackbird Estate, right? And I didn't want it to be a super well-known one like the Freemasons, because there's just too much data and information out there and it would get confusing. I wanted like a lesser-known one that there wasn't that much information about. And so the idea is that you can like embellish your understanding about what's going on in Spider 2 and see it from a different perspective and understand it in a deeper way and kind of understand some of the deeper mysteries and secrets if you learn about the secret society. Like if you go and figure out why I'm using certain symbols or why certain things are in the game. And so I've been literally drawing like these facts that I've been doing this research about the secret society into the game, but then in the process, of course, I've had to like embellish and interpret it because it's all deliberately obfuscated and confusing. And so then there's this whole other 5-dimensional layers of the layers chart where it's like this secret society that the family doesn't understand is actually based on a real one that I'm interpreting, and then you could come along later and kind of like follow in my research steps to sort of interpret it yourself, and hopefully that interpretation isn't too different. Like, it really kind of stink if you found out something I never knew and then I was wrong all the time. But that's kind of the fun. Like, it's the fun of it, like blending between fantasy and reality is sort of deliberate. Right, and so eventually I found exactly, it took a while, but I found exactly the right example, or it found me, or more appropriately, I sort of like led to this one specific secret society. They have activity in the right time and place historically. They're into things like secret doors and a couple other things that are going to be cool to bring into the game. They actually are interested in the moon, which from a long time ago we knew we wanted, in addition to the game conditions, like the moon phase persists across the real world into Spider, and so that works really well. So this is an awesome find. I'm pretty stoked, and so the game is based on the secret society, and I'm not going to tell you who they are. They're not called the Rite of the Shrouded Moon. That's just something we made up because it sounds like a snappy subtitle. And the reason I can't tell you yet is because I don't want people to get too far ahead and start figuring out the secrets of Spider 2 before we release the game. But at some point, we are going to give you the identifying information. So if you're the kind of person who's interested, you can kind of do this research at the same time. So then lastly, we do drop both in development screenshots and other cool stuff. And then we also post sometimes up there like interesting little clues and stuff. And so you could follow, if this sounds interesting to you, you should follow us on these things. The next thing that goes up is going to be my research report about secret societies. And lastly, I have some cool books up here. Some cool books. I got the International Encyclopedia of Secret Societies and Fraternal Orders. That one's good. It's got tons of lesser known secret societies and really cool stuff. This is Morals and Dogma, which is written by a 33-degree Mason, and it's about a lot of their beliefs and so forth. And I don't think laymen are supposed to have it, so if there's any snipers here, we should stop if you're reading it. And this is a pictorial history of that town, St. Albans, and all of its beautiful railroad buildings and stuff like that. And so that concludes the Mysteries and Magic portion. Thank you very much, and get back to playing Spider and intermingling with your fellows. Thanks for your attention.